people who throw cocktail parties and such. And just in a little while, he was taking too much liquor, staying out too late. His eyes were hanging out on his cheeks when he'd come in of a morning. And Mr. Carnegie let this go on for about 3 months. And he got invited out one evening to dinner. And after dinner was over, they went into the library. Mr. Carnegie said, "Now, I'm sitting over there in your chair, and you're sitting over here in my chair. I want to know what you would do if you were in my place. And you had a man scheduled for an important promotion, and all of a sudden it seemed to have gone to his head, started running around with fast company, staying out late at night, drinking too much liquor, paying too much attention to everything except his job. What in the world would you do in a case of that kind? I'm anxious to know." This young man said, "Mr. Carnegie, I know you're going to fire me, so you might as well start in and get it over with." Mr. Carnegie said, "Oh no. If I'd wanted to fire you, I wouldn't have given you a nice dinner and I wouldn't have brought you out to my house so I could have done that down at the office. No, I'm not going to fire you. I'm just going to have you ask yourself a question and see whether or not you're not about in the position to fire yourself. Maybe you are. Maybe you're closer to it than you realize." That man right about faced and did become one of Mr. Carnegie's mastermind group and did become a millionaire later on. It absolutely saved him from himself. Mr. Carnegie's tactfulness was out of this world. He knew how to handle men. He knew how to get them to examine themselves. It doesn't do much good for me to examine you, but it might do a lot of good if you examined yourself in connection with your faults and in connection with your virtues. Self-analysis is one of the most important forms of personal initiative that you can possibly engage in. Self-analysis. I never let a day go by that I don't examine myself to see where I have fallen down, to where I'm weak, where I can make improvements, what I could do to render more service and better service. Lord, I examine myself every day. And believe you me, this has been going on for a great number of years. And even today, I can always find some place where I can improve, where I can do something better or something more. It's a very healthy form of personal initiative, I'll assure you, and it's very interesting, too, because you finally get down to where you'll be honest with yourself. Do you have any idea how many people there are who are dishonest with themselves? It's the worst form of dishonesty that I know anything about at all. Creating alibis in your own mind to support your acts and your deeds and your thoughts, instead of examining yourself and finding out where you're weak and then bridging those weaknesses or getting somebody in your mastermind alliance to bridge them for you. Now that's personal initiative too, and it's the kind of personal initiative that most people won't engage in because it involves self-analysis and self-criticism. But which would you rather have? Would you rather have an outsider criticize you and point out your faults, or would you rather criticize yourself and find them?
Yourself.
Why? Well, you can be kind of confidential about it. You don't have to publicize these weaknesses that you find out, and you can get them corrected before anybody else finds out about them if you do a good job. But if you wait until somebody else has to call them to your attention, then they become public property, don't they? And they may embarrass you. They may hurt your pride. They may even cause you to build up an inferiority complex if you wait for the other fellow to have to point out your weaknesses to you. That's personal initiative too, finding out what your weak spots are, what it is that causes you to be disliked by other people, why it is you're not getting ahead as well as some of the other people, and where you know you've got just as much brains or even more than they have. Another marvelous place to take the personal initiative is to compare yourself with other people who are succeeding beyond your success. Make comparisons and analyses and to see what it is they have that you don't have. You'll be surprised to find out how much you can learn from the other fellow. Maybe the fellow you don't like very well either. You can learn something from him. If he's ahead of you, if he's doing better than you are, believe you me, you can always learn something from the man who's doing better than you're doing. Sometimes you can learn something from the fellow who's not doing as well as you're doing, too. It works both ways. You may find out why he's not doing as well. Number 15, the habit of listening much and talking only when necessary. I wonder how many of you listen more than you talk. Would you give me your hands? And I've never yet heard of anybody learning anything while he's talking. except that maybe he might learn to not talk so much. Well, now this seems kind of funny, but it's not funny, it's very serious. The vast majority of people do a lot more talking than they do listening, and they seem dead bent on getting the other fellow told off instead of listening to see what the other fellow has to say that they might profit by. Listening much and talking when necessary. Think first and talk last. And 16, a well-developed sense of observation of details. How many of you feel that you have a keen sense of observation of details? How many of you feel that you could walk down State Street here or any of these streets in front of Marshall Fields, just casually walk by, and then after you got at the end of the block, give a very accurate description of everything you saw in the window? Think you could do that? I once belonged to a class in Philadelphia directed by a man who was teaching us the importance of observation of small details, because he said it was the little details that made up the successes and the failures of life, not the big ones at all, the little ones. The ones we usually pass aside as not being important or that we don't even observe. And as a part of our training, he took us out of the hall and took us down the street 1 block, crossed over the street, came up 1 block, and back into the hall. And in doing so, we passed about 10 stores, one of which was a hardware store. And in that hardware store window, I would say there was easily 500 articles. And he asked each one of us to take a pad, a paper, and a pencil along. Now, mind you, giving us a crutch for our memory. And to put down the things that we saw as we passed along that we thought were important. And guess how many was the greatest number of things that any of us put down going 2 blocks, 1 block down this way, across and up the other side, and covering at least 20 stores. Guess how many was the greatest number of things that any of us saw? You'll be surprised. The greatest number of things that anybody had down was 56. And when this man came back, he didn't have any paper, no pencil. He listed 746 and described each one of them and told what window it was in and what part of the window it was in. I didn't accept it. I had to go down after the class was over and backtracked him and checked it, and he was absolutely 100% accurate. In other words, he had trained himself to observe details, not just a few of them, but all of them. And believe you me, a good executive, a good leader, a good anything is a person who observes all the things that are happening around him, the good things and the bad things, the positives and the negatives. He doesn't just happen to notice those things that interest him. He notices everything that may interest him or may affect his interests. Attention to details. Number 18, the capacity to stand criticism without resentment. How many of you can do that? Come on, give me your hands. Now I'm going to test you another way. How many of you invite criticism that is friendly criticism from other people?